fears about what was going to happen with Portuguese decolonization. Then when Indonesia invaded and started the slaughter, the press coverage started to decline. It reached a flat zero in 1978 as the slaughter reached genocidal levels, with new flows of aid from the U.S. government because Indonesia was actually running out of arms. So the Carter administration took a little time off from moral lessons about human rights to ensure that the slaughter would be completely genocidal. What press coverage there was endless lies, repeating either State Department or Indonesian propaganda. So, for example, Henry Kam, the leading New York Times Southeast Asia correspondent and an old Asia hand, he claimed that, his words, many Timorese have been forced to live under control of the Fretilin guerrillas, but they're now fleeing to areas where they can be protected by the Indonesian government. His authority was Indonesian generals. Even the worst Stalinist party hack rarely descended to that. Kam adds that there's some protests about East Timor, but he said these are just an attempt by highly vocal left-wing students in Australia to bash the West. You'll recall that this is the old Asia hand. Others were pretty much the same. The press flatly refused to interview refugees. There were thousands of them in Lisbon and thousands more in Australia. In desperation, some of those refugees were brought to the United States in the late 70s. Actually, I brought a group of them myself. Zero effect. Nobody would interview them. William Shawcross was trying to justify the dramatic difference in reaction to the slaughter in East Timor and the one in Cambodia at the same time, comparable slaughter. And he said, well, he's going to give a structurally serious reason for this. It was too hard to gain access to refugees from Timor. That is, you couldn't expect a British journalist to take the trip all the way from London to Lisbon instead of, say, taking that hourly shuttle to the Thai-Cambodia border. So it goes on. I'll read you a few things from the State Department. Robert Oakley, in 1977 hearings, said there are probably under 10,000 casualties. Indonesia, at the same time, estimated them at 50 to 80,000. Oakley's 10,000 figure was then repeated by Robert Chaplin in the New Yorker. He said there are no serious atrocities, few excesses by units that got out of control, just like this time. Commanders called back to Indonesia and punished. 78 hearings. We've been on the right track in encouraging Indonesia to do a better job in assisting the people of the territory who are fleeing from Fretilin control to areas where they can be protected by the Indonesian government. Remember, this is when the massacre's reaching genocidal levels. The State Department legal advisor informed Congress with a straight face that the incorporation of East Timor into Indonesia followed unanimous approval by the People's Council of East Timor of a petition asking Indonesia to accept integration of East Timor into Indonesia. Country officer for Indonesia testified in a hearing on the Indonesian invasion that the purpose of U.S. military aid is to keep that area peaceful. The people are relatively happy with the fact that they are now under Indonesia, he said. Well, I won't go on because time is running out, or maybe has run out. But this goes on right up until today. Nothing has changed. The most recent reports that I've seen from they come from Australian journalists who just got kicked out of Indonesia about 3 weeks ago, of Timor about 3 weeks ago, is that terror is increasing, torture is increasing, midnight raids are increasing. He was kicked out summarily from East Timor, and they stole his film, which included film of tortured people who'd been tortured with their ears cut off. He said, while I was there in early April, Indonesian troops were raiding houses and pulling teenagers out to send them to the torture chambers and so on. That's a brief, much too brief sample of the evidence. I wish I shared Ben Anderson's optimism about what all this is going to lead to. In my view, it depends very crucially on what happens here.
We will move to questions from you now, but let me start with a combination comment and question from Mr. Nino Brito, who is here from the Portuguese Embassy in Washington.
Well, good evening. I am the representative tonight of the government who is the administering power of the non-self-governing territory of East Timor, according to the United Nations relevant resolutions approved in '75 and then afterwards. I just would like to give you some remarks on 3 points. The self-determination question, the human rights dimension, and the development issues which were brought to us by Larry Dinger. Well, we view as positive the administration's acknowledgement that a valid act of self-determination has not taken place yet in East Timor. Therefore, we feel puzzled and dismayed with the recognition of the incorporation as well as with the fact that the United States considers East Timor as quote-unquote a province. I'm not going to recall you the example of what happened with Kuwait, but I would just point out that a fait accompli is not and cannot be taken as a relevant argument in terms of international law. We have no choice in Portugal. If you ask me, what does Portugal want from East Timor? It would be a very good question, but we have no choice but fighting for self-determination. It's a moral imperative for us. We never rejected our share of blame for what happened in East Timor in '74, in '75. But we do feel that it is absurd to deny the East Timorese people the right for self-determination, bearing in mind the sufferings and the horrible situation that they have been facing since the invasion. It is also, it's not well known, but it is also a constitutional requirement in Portugal that we have to try to find out a solution for East Timor. And it's written in the Portuguese constitution that every single Portuguese government has to seek for a just and balanced solution for the East Timorese problem, if you could say. We find out that it is ironic that the chairman state of the non-aligned movement, itself a former colony, has adopted such a ruthless colonialist behavior with regard to East Timor. Let me stress that Portugal has no claims whatsoever to the sovereignty over East Timor. Our sole aim is to bring about its decolonization process in observance of the principles of the United Nations Charter, and any choice, I repeat, any choice to be freely expressed by the population concerned would be fully respected by Portugal. I would remind you again that East Timor is proportionally one of the most serious cases confronting the international community when we analyze the human rights situation over there. That's why we do not agree with those who claim that the human rights situation in East Timor had improved before the November 12th massacre. It was a massacre, not an incident. It was not an isolated fact. We see it as a repetition of a pattern confirmed by the analysis of other governments and NGOs everywhere. We also fear that any such incidents will recur while the underlying causes remain unresolved. Let me also point out that we feel, in Portugal, we feel that the end of the Cold War should enable certain countries to make a different evaluation of the situation in East Timor. We should not draw a distinction between good and bad human rights violators. For us, there is only a definition for those who violate, who do not comply with the rules of international law. And quite honestly, we feel that we should stop looking under our beds for Marxist movements as a kind of a stalking horse for condoning unspeakable human rights violators from a number of governments. We also feel that it's fruitless to engage in comparisons on the development in East Timor between the Portuguese rule and Indonesian colonization. I think that we should not omit the burdensome and unjustified human hardships resulting from the occupation, because it is an occupation and it is going on at this point. And we just say that if the development had brought well-being to the East Timorese, the presence of up to 20,000 soldiers would not be necessary. We know that the control of the hearts and minds of the people is a well-known practice of repression, and it is used when other tools of terror prove ineffective. We have that experience because we were, unfortunately, a former colonial power until '74. And the coup, which was referred as a leftist coup, and which brought us democracy in Portugal in '74, was a consumer case. Let me underline also that as we speak, Timorese civilians are, quote, standing trial, unquote, in Jakarta and Dili. And we feel that we should bear in mind that Indonesia is still ignoring the assurances it gave on March 4 when it subscribed to the Human Rights Commission consensus, which called on it to improve the human rights situation in East Timor, to facilitate access to the territory for human rights organizations, and to ensure a fair trial for the civilians arrested during and after the Santa Cruz massacre. In addition, despite those assurances, Indonesia continues to detain individuals not charged with acts of violence. In conclusion, let me just say that we consider encouraging that the administration's support to the talks between Portugal and Indonesia to resolve the East Timor question. The United States are friendly and country and ally of Portugal, and that means that we are able to engage in a very frank discussion on these issues as well on other issues. But I would say that I would remind you that we propose that with no preconditions, negotiations between all parties concerned, and that includes the representatives of the East Timorese people, would be initiated as soon as Indonesia would be ready for that. We are ready to talk, and we said that on January the 24th in a proposal that my foreign minister presented to the Secretary General of the United Nations. We just hope that Indonesians, who have not yet given an answer to this proposal, replace their well-known readiness for repression with a readiness to discuss the issue in a constructive way. Thank you.
I guess the tradition is to, goodness, there are two microphones. I wasn't aware of that. So let's move. No political connotations from left to right and then back to left and back to right. And can I ask you to keep these very clearly questions and not comments? The first was really meant to be a comment. The others are not. So keep them brief give a chance for more people to ask questions, address them either to a particular panel member